Before history was written, it was fought in blood. This is Echoes of War. They called it the Great War, a name that sounded powerful, almost noble, as if the scale of destruction could somehow give it meaning. But there was nothing great about it, nothing noble, nothing glorious. It was a war of mud and steel, of fire and fear, of young men disappearing into landscapes that no longer looked like Earth. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe stood at what seemed like the peak of human civilization. Great cities shimmered with electric lights that pushed back the darkness of night. Factories roared with industry, producing goods, machines, and weapons at a pace the world had never seen. Trains crossed borders in hours, and telegrams carried words across continents in seconds. Science promised progress. Leaders promised stability.
People believed the future would be brighter than the past. But beneath that surface of confidence, something far less stable was taking shape. Old rivalries had never truly faded. Nations remembered past humiliations, past defeats, past wars that had ended on paper but not in memory. Pride mixed with fear, and fear quietly guided decisions made in royal palaces and government halls. Germany feared being surrounded by enemies. France feared the growing power of Germany. Russia wanted influence and respect. Britain guarded its empire with suspicion toward any nation that might threaten its dominance at sea. Austria-Hungary, vast and fragile, feared collapse from within as different cultures and identities pulled at its seams. Every power believed it was acting defensively. Every power believed war would be someone else's fault.
So they formed alliances, webs of promises designed to prevent conflict, but built in such a way that if one nation fell into war, others would be dragged in with it. Europe became a structure held together by tension, like a bridge made of dry wood, waiting for a single spark. That spark came in the summer of 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. It was a warm day, and crowds gathered along the streets to watch a royal visit. An open car rolled slowly past, carrying Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife. It was supposed to be a routine appearance, another small moment in the long story of empire. From the edge of the crowd stepped a young man with a pistol and a belief that violence could change the future. 2 shots rang out, sharp and sudden, echoing off the buildings. In a few seconds, the Archduke and his wife were dead. The crowd screamed. The car sped away.
And across Europe, leaders began making decisions that would cost millions of lives. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and prepared to punish it. Germany offered unconditional support to its ally, believing strength would prevent escalation. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia, unwilling to lose influence in the region. France stood by Russia. Britain watched with growing alarm as Germany's military plans began to unfold. Ultimatums were sent, demands written in the language of pride rather than compromise. Deadlines passed. Armies began to move. Once mobilization started, it moved with a force of its own. Trains carried soldiers toward borders faster than diplomats could negotiate. Plans built over decades unfolded in days. By the time leaders realized how large the conflict would become, it was already too late. In August of 1914, Europe was at war. At first, there was excitement in the streets.
Crowds cheered as young men marched away in clean uniforms, waving from train windows, convinced they would return home as heroes before the year ended. They imagined short battles, dramatic victories, stories they would tell for the rest of their lives. Families smiled through their fear, believing the same comforting lie, that modern war would be quick. They could not yet see the trenches. When the early battles failed to bring decisive victory, both sides dug into the earth for protection. Shallow ditches became deep trenches, reinforced with wood and sandbags, stretching across hundreds of miles. What began as a temporary measure hardened into a permanent scar across the continent. From the cold waters of the North Sea to the mountains near Switzerland, a jagged line divided Europe. This was the Western Front, a place where the landscape itself seemed wounded. Trees were shattered into splinters.
Fields were churned into oceans of mud. Villages vanished under endless shell fire until only broken walls remained. Life in the trenches slowly stripped away the illusion of glory. Rain turned the ground into thick, sucking mud that swallowed boots and sometimes men. Rats grew bold, feeding on scraps and on the bodies that could not be buried. Lice spread through clothing. The smell of damp earth mixed with decay and smoke until it became impossible to separate one from the other. Days were filled with waiting, a tense stillness broken at any moment by the scream of incoming shells. Artillery never truly stopped. Even in the distance, its thunder rolled like an endless storm. Soldiers learned to sleep in fragments, to eat beside the dead, to live with a constant pressure in their chest that never fully went away. Between the opposing trench lines lay a stretch of shattered ground known as no man's land.
It was a place without shelter, without mercy, illuminated at night by flares that turned darkness into a pale, ghostly light. Bodies lay where they had fallen, sometimes for weeks or months, too dangerous to retrieve. The ground was cratered, torn open again and again by explosions, as if the earth itself were trying to hide from the sky. When orders came to attack, soldiers climbed out of the trenches and walked into that wasteland. They moved forward under the weight of their gear, hearts pounding, knowing that survival often depended on luck more than skill. Machine guns waited on the other side, weapons capable of firing hundreds of rounds a minute, cutting down lines of men before they could even see the enemy's face. Victory was measured in yards. Losses were measured in thousands. A single morning could erase an entire regiment.
And when the smoke cleared, the front lines often looked almost exactly the same. As the stalemate dragged on, the war found new ways to kill. Poison gas drifted across battlefields in silent clouds, seeping into trenches and burning lungs from the inside. Soldiers fumbled for masks, some too late, their final moments spent gasping for air that would not come. Survivors carried damaged lungs and haunted memories for the rest of their lives. New machines appeared. Inventions of a modern age turned toward destruction. Tanks rolled forward for the first time, metal giants crawling over barbed wire in trenches, slow but relentless. Flamethrowers turned darkness into sudden rivers of fire. Above the battlefield, airplanes dueled in fragile frames of wood and canvas, pilots circling each other in the cold sky while the world burned below. War had become industrial.
Factories far from the front lines worked day and night, producing shells, rifles, uniforms, and vehicles. The outcome of battles depended not only on courage, but on production schedules and supply chains. Human lives were consumed at a pace that matched the rhythm of machines. At home, the war changed everything. Food grew scarce as farms became battlefields and trade routes collapsed. Women stepped into factories and hospitals, taking on roles once reserved for men now fighting overseas. Families gathered around kitchen tables, reading letters from the front over and over until the paper grew thin. Sometimes the letters stopped coming, replaced by official notices delivered with quiet voices and lowered eyes. Years passed, and the hope of a quick victory faded into a dull determination simply to endure.
Leaders on both sides feared that ending the war without clear victory would make all the sacrifice meaningless. So they ordered more attacks, more offensives, more waves of men sent into the same storms of fire. In 1917, one of the great empires could endure no longer.
Russia collapsed into revolution, its soldiers abandoning the front and turning their anger inward. For a moment, Germany believed this was the turning point it needed. If one enemy had fallen, perhaps the rest would follow. But across the Atlantic, another nation had been watching. The United States entered the war, bringing fresh troops and vast resources. Slowly, steadily, new soldiers crossed the ocean, their presence shifting the balance of power. The war that had drained Europe now drew strength from a continent far away. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched one final desperate offensive. Its armies pushed forward with everything they had left, breaking through weakened lines, advancing farther than they had in years. For a moment, it seemed possible that the gamble might succeed. But momentum is not the same as endurance. Supplies ran thin. Soldiers marched on empty stomachs. Allied forces, reinforced and reorganized, began to push back. The advance slowed, then stalled, then reversed. What had begun as a final bid for victory became a long retreat. Behind the front lines, Germany itself was beginning to crack. Hunger spread, strikes erupted. Faith in the war faded among civilians who had already sacrificed too much. Leaders who once spoke confidently of triumph now face unrest and uncertainty. Then, on the 11th day of the 11th month, in the 11th hour of 1918, the guns fell silent. After more than 4 years of near constant thunder, the quiet felt unreal. Soldiers waited, listening, half expecting the shelling to resume. When it did not, some wept openly. Others simply sat where they were, too exhausted to feel relief. The war had ended, but its cost was beyond measure. More than 16 million people were dead. Millions more returned home wounded in body and mind, carrying scars that medicine did not yet understand. Empires that had stood for centuries vanished in a matter of months. New nations appeared, fragile and uncertain, drawn on maps by men far from the trenches. The peace that followed was not built on healing, but on blame. Punishment replaced reconciliation. Defeat turned into humiliation, and humiliation quietly turned into anger. Across Europe, economies struggled, societies fractured, and many people felt that the suffering they had endured had not led to stability, but to something even more uncertain.
World War I did not simply change borders, it changed how humanity saw itself. It shattered the belief that progress alone could protect civilization from its own darker instincts. It revealed how quickly pride could override reason, how easily alliances could become traps, and how a single act of violence could echo across generations. Today, grass grows where trenches once cut through the earth. Villages have been rebuilt. Forests have returned to places once stripped bare by shellfire. On the surface, the land looks peaceful again. But the world that emerged from that war, with its unresolved tensions and fragile agreements, shaped everything that followed. The political map, the balance of power, the fears and resentments carried into the decades ahead all bear the mark of those years of mud and fire.
The soldiers who fought are gone now, their voices fading into history. Yet the consequences of their war still ripple through our world, in ways both visible and hidden. Because wars do not end when the guns fall silent. They continue in memory, in borders, in the quiet weight of decisions made long ago. The battlefield grows silent, but history never does.